Hi, I'm Irene Pease, your friendly neighborhood astronomer, and this is just taking a look at the night skies for August 8th through 14th, 2021. Visuals are using Stellarium, which you can find at stellarium.org, and we're just going to jump right on in here. So, we can see the sun is setting. This isn't quite sunset time. This is set for 7 o'clock, and this is Eastern time because I'm in the Eastern time zone, a bit north of New York City. By 8, the sun is set, and we can start to take a look at what's happening over in the west. So if you've been following these, you know that Venus is out after sunset, and later this week we'll also have a moon visiting it. A lot of times I like to try to find Venus during the day using the moon as a marker, but it's not going to be that close. It's still going to be over 6 degrees. So really, I just like to look if it's only a few degrees, but the 10th is going to be our closest day, and it's actually going to be pretty far apart yet, over 6 degrees. I think it's about 6 degrees around sunset. So I'm going to say forget that. We'll try again another month for that. However, if we spinny turn around, we will also see, as it gets dark, there it's dark, Jupiter and Saturn. So those will be rising just as the sky is getting dark. They'll be above our horizon now. We don't have to wait so much. So Jupiter and Saturn, always a treat, especially in telescopes. So Jupiter, you can expect to see the Galilean moons, and they should always be in a row because Jupiter isn't tilted so much on its axis relative to the plane of the solar system. Its axis is pretty much perpendicular to the solar system plane, the ecliptic. Whereas Saturn, if you can see it in a telescope, you might see some of its moons. I don't think I've ever seen any of its moons in binoculars. Jupiter, again, the moons you can see in binoculars. Saturn, you need a telescope. You might be able to pick out a few of the brightest ones. Titan, definitely the brightest. That's the largest one. That's the one with an atmosphere. And again, if you see it in a telescope, the moons aren't all in one row. They're kind of lined up a little bit this week, which is kind of funny. But even just with the tilt of the rings, you can tell that Saturn is tilted relative to the plane of the solar system. Otherwise, we would only see the rings edge on ever. We wouldn't see them kind of facing us either towards or away from us. So if you do have a pair of binoculars, you can always try to look for Saturn. See if you can hold the binoculars really steady to make out kind of like a pinched lemon shape. Jupiter, try to hold your binocular steady. See if you can see a couple of the moons there. Of course, the super exciting thing that's happening this week on the 12th, the night of the 12th to 13th, that's the peak of the Perseids meteor shower. And for that, you want to stay up really late or get up really early. So I'm just going to fast forward to a little after midnight. That's when I'll try to view them if the weather is good. So again, just a reminder, you want to go somewhere dark, somewhere safe. Safe before dark, so always safety first, but the darker the better, and having a wide open view. So I talked about this a little bit last week, and then I talked about it even more in my Thursday evening live stream, which wasn't actually live because I was at another event, so it was recorded, but I still talked about it. And yeah, and I also mentioned the things that I think I actually promised I was going to mention for this recording. In addition to the 3 stars of the summer triangle that'll be nice and high overhead, there's our whole sky looking right up and just a little to the west. We have that summer triangle, Deneb in Cygnus the Swan, Vega in Lyra the Harp, and Altair and Aquila the Eagle. I said, hey, why not let's look at a couple fainter constellations, which frankly I'm not as familiar with because most of the time I don't have a super dark sky. But now that I do have a slightly darker sky, a little bit closer to home, I'm going to try to find these as well and see if I can start picking them out easier. Again, they're right along the plane of the Milky Way. So if you do see Milky Way at your nice dark location, kudos, and that's your first guide. Also, again, I think I mentioned from, actually, let's not pick Vega. Let's pick the far star. So if you can find Lyra the Harp, there's basically a little triangle and then a little parallelogram that is attached to the triangle. So this far star, that's Gamma Lyrae. So we're going to go from Gamma to Alberio, and that puts us right into Vulpecula. So again, these stars in here are Vulpecula. That's supposed to be a fox. So with enough hot toddies, it'll look like a fox, I guess. Yeah, basically, I'm just going to look for the stars between Alberio and Sagitta. Sagitta should be a little bit easier to pick out because the stars there are a little bit brighter. So again, I'm going to be looking between Alberio and Altair and see if I can see this little triangle with another bright star that it points to. So I'm going to be looking for this tiny triangle. And again, this actually kind of looks like an arrow then. The little triangle, that's kind of the feather part. Is that the fletch? Don't remember. I'm not an archer person. But that part. And then the brighter star up here along the shaft of the arrow. So that's what I'll be looking for to try to pick these out. Also, if you want to explore these in more detail through binoculars or really a telescope later on. So remember, don't want to look through the telescope while you're trying to see Perseids because you want to look up all over the sky, and a telescope is just going to look at a tiny part of the sky. So a super fun deep sky object for each of these once you become more familiar with them and become a total expert in finding them. If I go from, what do I do with this? I go from Vega to Alberio and then keep going, I think, to get to, is it somewhere in here? Nope, that's not it. I'm going to use my cheat sheet here to get to the Dumbbell Nebula. So the Dumbbell Nebula, M27, is a planetary nebula. I like the apple core. I think the apple core is more descriptive, especially if you see pretty pictures of it. I don't know if this will like show us a cool picture if we zoom in enough. Yeah, that looks a lot more like an apple core than a dumbbell, especially with the coloring, right? So the coloring, that's just specific emission lines of the gas that it's giving off. So we pick those up with time-lapse photography. And then also, so that's actually in Vulpecula. It looks kind of between the two, but technically, if we turn on our borders of the constellations, that's in Vulpecula. Yeah, it's a long, sleek fox, apparently. And then in here, in Sagitta, we have a globular cluster. Imagine that, me looking at a globular cluster. So this is M71. Again, I've never called it the angelfish cluster. I mean, a globular cluster is, it's bright and sparkly. That's the main thing. But this one is relatively bright, magnitude 6.1, so you should be able to see it in reasonable sized telescopes in a pretty dark sky, or even a not ridiculously dark sky. I think, again, the tricky part is that it's not near any really bright stars, like it's there in Sagitta, not like the brightest constellation in the sky. But if you can find those two stars of Sagitta, it should be pretty straightforward to find this globular cluster about halfway between them. Looks like we're looking just a little to the west. So those are going to be some things I'll be looking for, trying to find those two constellations while I'm out just looking up at the gloriousness, hopefully, of a clear dark sky with no moon. Just one other thing to mention. So the Perseids are kind of out in the news this week because that's what's happening. And if it's cloudy where you are this week, try, through the weekend and into next week. We'll be starting to run into a little bit of moon eventually, but it's still, Perseids season. The other thing that I wanted to mention is a comet that you may have seen in the news. Just looking. Yeah, so that is up currently in the constellation Pegasus. So there's this new comet that was discovered just this last week, at the beginning of the week, like when I recorded last week's current skies. C2021-03. It's another comet from Pan-STARRS survey. and it's kind of up in the section of the sky near Pegasus. So it's currently in the constellation Pegasus, near Andromeda, so kind of in this corner, I believe, of Pegasus. So it's really far away. It's like 20th magnitude, which basically it's really, really faint, so you're not going to see it unless you have a ginormous telescope. But when it gets a bit closer to the sun, so right now it's like I think over 4 astronomical units from the sun, so over 4 Earth-Sun distances from the sun. So it's way out there yet. So no tail yet, but it should be getting one soonish eventually. Should be going around the sun, so its closest approach that we call perihelion, closest to the sun, perihelion, close sun. That's going to be next April. And so if it survives that, then it should be a really pretty comet that we might be able to see in the sky. Of course, it won't still be in this section of the sky. It'll be somewhere totally different. And if that happens, I'll let you know about it then. But that's something to maybe just pencil into your calendar for next May, if there might be another comet. If you remember, we had Comet Neowise last year that was pretty awesome. It's about this time of year. So if this one holds, and we never know, it's really just, you know, really hard to tell what's going to happen when comets go through perihelion, if they're going to make it or not. But that's a potential for next spring, late spring. So that's it for the skies this week. Thanks for tuning in. If you have questions, comments, requests, all that good stuff, feel free to leave comments or email me. You can drop a note. Find out more about what I'm doing on my website, friendlyneighborhoodastronomer.com. And again, for the visuals, I was using Stellarium, which you can find at stellarium.org. Tune into my live stream if you want to hear more about what's happening in your celestial neighborhood, just taking tours around the night skies using Stellarium and OpenSpace. Otherwise, I'll be back next week with the skies for August 15 through 21. Clear skies, everyone.